What's up, everyone? We're back.
Dr. Maxfield,
Dr. Shah, and welcome back to our channel, Doctorly, where we talk about all things skincare and dermatology. Highly requested video today. I think probably during our first video, we promised we would come out with this video at some point.
Possible.
Finally coming out today with something on hyperpigmentation, dark spots, melasma, a very common problem that people suffer from. And we're going to discuss some of our top level tips for people with dark spots.
So there were a lot of ways we could do this, and we're like, okay, what's the best way to roll this out? And we're looking through the list of everything we put together, you know what? We should probably just talk about the mistakes we've made that we see people make, and then, talk about how to fix them and how to do this as best you possibly can.
Exactly. So today, hyperpigmentation, dark spot mistakes, and how to correct them. Here we go.
Here we go. Okay, so this is really important to me this year in particular. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Actually, I know a lot of what I'm doing right. I actually have a ton of sunscreens. I'm using them all consistently, layering multiple times, but I'm getting a lot more freckles from the sun and the surf this year. Multiple people have commented on it in real life, and it's really starting to annoy me.
I think you're just seeing yourself more.
That's also probably true.
On video, because we're editing the videos, you're probably seeing your skin more. This is probably why skincare really took off during the pandemic, was because people were seeing themselves on Zoom so much more, and they're like, wait, what is that, right? I feel like I do that sometimes. I'm like, oh wow, I have that? I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, it could be. But I'm telling you, people at the office, they're just like, wow, you got a lot of freckles now, huh? And I'm like, do I really? I guess I do.
All right, so of course we have to talk about the most common mistake that we see people making, which is not wearing sunscreen. I see this literally every single time someone comes in with hyperpigmentation. Actually, yesterday when I was in clinic, I had a patient that came in. They actually said that their hyperpigmentation was treated, or they actually had melasma. Their hyperpigmentation was treated. It actually got better with the treatment, and then it came back. And why did it come back? It came back because they weren't wearing sunscreen.
You can invest every single dollar in your bank account to treating your hyperpigmentation, get it to go away, and if you don't wear sunscreen, every last penny was spent in vain. It's just you're failing at treating this.
Yeah, and I think that it's not something that we spend a lot of time in dermatology counseling on. We kind of take for granted. We think people are going to be wearing sunscreen while we're treating their hyperpigmentation. And so now I actually personally have changed the way that I practice, where I actually spend half the appointment counseling on wearing sunscreen, because historically people with darker skin tones are more prone to this hyperpigmentation and melasma, and they're also not raised on wearing sunscreen very often. And I was never raised wearing sunscreen. You were never raised wearing sunscreen. And so when we give you a treatment, you're not thinking I need to add in sunscreen, which makes sense, right? So we really spend a lot of time focusing on sunscreen, sun protection, and what kind of sunscreen specifically is going to have the most benefit.
We need a tinted sunscreen. You have to have the iron oxides to expand the coverage, not only UVA, UVB, but also to optimize coverage for visible light.
So when you look at the back of a sunscreen label, you'll actually see at the very top, because they're regulated like drugs almost in the United States. And so at the very top of the list, you'll see active ingredients. And then underneath it, you'll have the other scattered ingredients. Now, those active ingredients are things like octinoxate, zinc oxide, titanium dioxide. But in the inactive ingredient section is where you want to look for the word iron oxides. Iron oxides help to block against that visible light that we do know causes hyperpigmentation in some people.
And your sunscreen doesn't have to just be an inactive thing you do at the end. This can contain ingredients like niacinamide. We've talked about Elta-MD UV Clear. They have a tinted version with niacinamide in it.
Right, so we have to start looking at sunscreen as almost part of the treatment plan going forward. So critical, if you get nothing else from this video, if you have hyperpigmentation, sometimes that fades on its own if you have a good sunscreen to protect you against worsening the hyperpigmentation. Because otherwise you're taking one step forward and one step back. So first thing, find a good, preferably tinted sunscreen if you can find one that matches your skin tone. So in addition to just traditional sunscreen, you could, in addition to it, right? So this is not going to be a replacement for sunscreen. You can think about taking a supplement called HelioCare. HelioCare has an active ingredient called Polypodium leucomotus extract. That Polypodium leucomotus extract has been shown in studies to actually supplement the treatment of melasma because it has some antioxidant properties and can really help protect you against the sun in addition to your sunscreen. So I would add that to the sun protection category, something worth looking into. Is it necessary? I think not. Do I think it has additive benefits according to the studies? I think yes.
So that one was the given, and our next one is also kind of commonsensical, but it's you've got to treat the underlying cause.
commonsensical?
Yeah, that's probably a word.
That's definitely not a word.
Almost certainly it might be.
Right. So not treating the cause, right? So this is similar to the sun protection thing, one step forward, one step back, right? So we have to think about what causes hyperpigmentation. One, the sun, hormones during pregnancy. You can't really control that. The other thing is just inflammation. Inflammation can hyperactivate those melanocytes. They can also lead to hyperpigmentation. So getting the cause of inflammation under control, for example, that could be somebody who has acne, and those acne bumps resolve in hyperpigmentation. And so if you don't treat the acne, you really can't go after the hyperpigmentation. Now, granted, I will say that, acne is a chronic condition, and so you can't sometimes completely get rid of your acne, and you still want to treat your hyperpigmentation at the same time, but make sure that you do have a treatment for your acne to prevent those inflammatory bumps from happening.
And I think an important thing here actually is getting the correct diagnosis. We may not emphasize this enough, and maybe we're guilty of that, but seeing a specialist dermatologist for your hyperpigmentation may be pretty important, just to make sure that you've got the actual correct diagnosis, you're actually going to be treating the correct cause and treating the cause extremely effectively.
So right, finding the underlying cause, critical. Treating the underlying cause, critical. And I think that's a common mistake that we see people making. Find out what's causing your hyperpigmentation, then direct treatment at it. Another mistake that I see people commonly making, especially when they come in with another treatment regimen that they've come up on their own, is not using the ingredients correctly that they found or that they were prescribed. So these may be effective ingredients, but they're not being used appropriately. And we commonly see this specifically with hydroquinone.
Yeah, hydroquinone actually, I think, warrants its own section here because of how it needs to be used, its effectiveness, and then how it is often used in real life.
Right. So one of the mistakes that we see people making is that they're using it for too long. So hydroquinone really should be used for short periods of time. So 2, 3 months, 4 months under the control of a dermatologist, especially at higher concentrations. But if you use it long term, you run the risk of something called exogenous ochronosis.
Yeah, and we've mentioned this, I think, in a previous video just briefly, but this is where you get irreversible darkening and dark spots just kind of around the areas that you'd applied it. And this is so refractory to treatment, it just doesn't go away. And so that's why you need someone to come alongside you and make sure that if you're developing any new pigment or you're not having any problems with it, that you're getting the most out of this medication without causing harm.
Also, when you look under the microscope, because we're a bunch of microscope nerds, when you have hyperpigmentation or dark spots or melasma, it looks like this under the microscope. And then when you look at what happens when you get that exogenous ochronosis with long-term hydroquinone treatment, you get these banana bodies or ochronosis underneath the skin. It looks very different, and this is actually refractory to treatment.
So I think of hydroquinone actually similarly to how I think of topical corticosteroids. It's extremely effective. Like, there's a reason that all of the studies compare their new ingredients to hydroquinone. It's because it's ultra effective, but you need to use it to burst things down and temporarily. So you burst things down, you burst down the hyperpigmentation, and then after you're done using it for that short window of time, then you're going to transition to something sustainable.
Right. So one of our mentors who taught us a lot of what we know, Dr. Crane, if you're watching this, shout out Dr. Crane. He has a saying, especially with patients that have eczema, that you use the corticosteroid to put the fire out, and then you use the other treatments to keep the wood damp from kind of catching fire again. So it's the same concept with hydroquinone. You use it to put out the fire that is the hyperpigmentation, and then you use other treatments to keep the wood wet so it doesn't catch fire again.
I've never heard the second half of that. I may not listen to him closely.
So on this channel, we always talk about how things happen the way they do, and then why you're going to treat them the way that you would treat them, right? That's critical, because you understand what causes it, you can understand how to treat it. This is like a theme of our channel. So what causes hyperpigmentation?
And so we talked about this enzyme. This is one of the few enzymes we'll talk about a million times in our lives, but it's called tyrosinase. And this is a key enzyme, a rate-limiting enzyme in the production of our pigment.
Right, so pigmentation starts with tyrosinase producing pigment, that pigment being produced in the melanocyte, it being spread out to the melanosome, that melanosome travels to the skin cell, and then it releases pigment there. And so there are multiple ways along that pathway that you can kind of snipe out or stop the process. But once the pigment forms, then you have other methods that once the pigment is already released into the skin, there are other methods to kind of turn those skin cells over to help get rid of the pigment that's actually deposited. And so you kind of have to take a approach that hits more than one of these pathways. So if you can stop it at the synthesis step, we're actually creating the melanin pigment, or you can stop it at the transfer step, or you can actually turn it over or get rid of it once it's actually formed and deposited in the tissue. And so when we're creating treatment plans, we try to knock out multiple steps to have that additive benefit. So here's another little side tip. It's a tip on a tip. So for people that are trying to treat their acne and their hyperpigmentation at the same time, then our two favorite ingredients, and we always say this, is retinoids and azelaic acid, because these are both ingredients. So you can get the ordinary azelaic acid at 10%, or you can use like Differin gel or adapalene gel from La Roche-Posay. Those two ingredients, they treat acne and hyperpigmentation, and so you're treating the cause and the pigment at the same time. So now that we know how pigment is produced in the skin, let's create like a routine that would target multiple steps.
You bet. And what we can do is we'll build like a table for you here, and we'll have different categories of the different steps, and we'll list out some of the ingredients that are great for each step. And that way you can kind of pick and choose and build an ingredient list or find a product that would be great for you.
Can this be done in Venn diagram form?
No, it cannot be done in Venn diagram form.
Actually, our editor hated us for the Venn diagram because it took a long time to actually put that together. But we'll do this in list format for you, so you know you can craft your perfect skincare routine for hyperpigmentation based on these ingredients. But just keep in mind, you want to take out multiple steps. So what would you say is like the best ingredient to take out that tyrosinase enzyme that's actually creating the pigment?
All right, so it may not be sexy, but I'm gonna let you guys know right now, a hydroquinone is by far my favorite because it's just so ultra effective. It's like unabashedly, unashamedly effective, and it just works. So for me, that's like the one I would make sure I incorporated if I really want to do this seriously.
Yeah, I think that hydroquinone, extremely effective, short-term, very effective ingredient. It also takes out other steps. It's not just the tyrosinase enzyme, but it does other things as well. And then if you wanted to take out the step that transfers the melanin pigment to those skin cells, what would you think would be an effective ingredient for that?
So the transfer from the melanosomes, retinoids would be a good option for this one to help prevent that.
Again, retinoids are not only going to take out that step, but they'll also inhibit the melanin synthesis, and they will also help to turn the skin cells over. So they'll have additive benefits. And then last, I think just exfoliating, once a week, once every 2 weeks with something like salicylic acid or glycolic acid or mandelic acid, which is a little bit safer for people that are prone to hyperpigmentation. I think if you exfoliate once a week or so, it's going to be very effective for getting the pigment that's already deposited in the skin.
Yeah, and retinoids help there too because they also can increase the cell turnover. So again, we have multiple ingredients that do multiple things, but this should help you kind of put together something that would work for you.
So when we're looking at our cleanse, treat, protect regimen, you'd have a cleanser, and that could be any basic cleanser, and then you would use your active ingredients. And I think that 3 active ingredients in this category, and you wouldn't necessarily use them at the same time, at different times of the day, at different times of the week: hydroquinone, a retinoid, and then maybe an alpha hydroxy acid or a beta hydroxy acid, and then a moisturizer and a sunscreen. And that really is going to be the ingredients that you would need to make a good hyperpigmentation routine, which we'll do more on, but you want to think about taking out multiple steps.
So I've held my tongue for most of the video, and I think it's very interesting that even up to this point, neither one of us has talked about vitamin C. And that's so big because vitamin C is such like a popular ingredient.
I think it's like, I don't consider vitamin C to be a hyperpigmentation treatment.
I don't either.
And when we did our acne video, we talked about ingredients that were treatments. Like we, for example, said benzoyl peroxide is a really good treatment for acne. And then we said that niacinamide was a supplemental ingredient for acne. It's not necessarily an acne treatment. And that's kind of how I feel about vitamin C for hyperpigmentation. That's also how I feel about niacinamide for hyperpigmentation, is that these are adjuncts to a good treatment regimen because they're not strong enough, in my opinion, to really have those benefits.
I think that's probably fair. I think it really has a lot of attention in that space. I think it can help even out the skin color, kind of make it more homogeneous and brighter. But yeah, I don't think it's a standalone in this category.
Yeah, it's just in my experience with it, it's just not potent enough at doing any of these particular tasks in order for me to consider it a top level ingredient for hyperpigmentation. So with that in mind, so actually, as a matter of fact, we'll link below because I think this is actually if you're somebody who likes to read research, there was a really, really good article written in the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology on post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. I think it's worth reading, but ultimately in that article, they came to the conclusion that the most effective treatment for hyperpigmentation is a cream that is a combination of these ingredients. And it makes sense because, like we said, you want to take out multiple steps along the way. And so they found that a combination of a retinoid tretinoin, hydroquinone, and a topical anti-inflammatory, a steroid basically, that could calm the inflammation that occurs afterwards. And so this is called Triluma. You can get this compounded by multiple pharmacies, but it's a combination of these 3 ingredients.
Yeah, and I think this plays well because, like I said before, topical steroids are used for short-term benefits and to burst down inflammation. Topical hydroquinone is used for short-term to burst down hyperpigmentation. Retinoids they're retinoids. They do what they do. They do retinoid things. And so this ingredient list of 3 things, super effective, and it's probably the premier way to start off your journey in treating hyperpigmentation.
So unfortunately, in the United States, hydroquinone is officially banned over the counter. You can only get it as a prescription. And so we'll talk about some of our favorite products that you can still get over the counter that will have benefit for dark spots.
One of our favorites, when we saw the ingredient list, you're just like blown away, but this is Faded by Topicals. Like, it's affordable. The ingredient list is just extraordinary, and it's got everything you need in it.
Right. We'll list the ingredient list here just so that you can sort of understand how it fits into our chart on hyperpigmentation. But it is going to be very effective. Go slow with it. It is a pretty strong product. Another good option that's actually quite affordable, I'll put 2 products here. So the tranexamic acid night treatment from the Enki list, which I think is a very affordable just tranexamic acid product that's also going to have a benefit in hyperpigmentation. And also the Enki list makes an alpha-arbutin product that I think is a good substitute for hydroquinone because they're sort of downstream of each other. Arbutin is very effective in a similar mechanism to hydroquinone.
And then one of the kind of gold standard but high-end over-the-countering products is SkinCeuticals Discoloration Defense.
Yeah, that's a great option. It is a little bit expensive, but I've actually had a lot of people use it and had a lot of benefit with it. So hefty price tag, but it does use a combination of ingredients that are effective for hyperpigmentation. Now, there are tons of products out there that treat hyperpigmentation. We'll list a bunch before. We'll go through a bunch of ingredient lists for you, come up with ones that we think are going to be very effective, and then you can pick and choose from those whatever's available near you, and that way you can shop it a little bit better. But there are a lot of options out there, but the most important thing is understanding how you're going to treat it, why it's going to work, and finally, tinted sunscreen.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So thank you all so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah, we appreciate you always. Thank you for your patience in waiting for this video in particular.
More on hyperpigmentation to come. Thank you all so much. I'm a melanocyte, or a pigment-producing cell of the skin. I have tyrosinase, an enzyme that makes melanin, and I'm gonna make a melanin ball. And I'm gonna package it in a little packaging called the melanosome. And I'm gonna pass it to you. Oh wow! You got darker. Sure did. Oh no, is that the sun?